Hi, my name is Tony Galina, and I am the managing partner of Aqua-Terr Systems Incorporated, otherwise known as ATSI. We have been working for sustainability since 1982 and have over 50 years of combined environmental consulting experience here in the office available to us today. We are located in Bellingham, Washington, as indicated here by the pin on the Google Earth Pro map behind me. And we primarily work in the great state of Washington in Whatcom County, Skagit County, Island County, San Juan County, Snohomish County, King County, Lewis County, Kitsap County. Sometimes we also work in the great states of Oregon and Alaska. Now in this video, I'm going to show you all of our services start to finish on a specific development, and that development is called Whispering Meadows. So let's come over. I'm going to interject here from the editing floor. This is going to sound like we're disorganized. This video will not cover every single thing that we have done for this project since we started back in 2018. This will be a high level view of the important steps that the developer has taken, along with help from us, in in-depth analysis of particular aspects of those steps in order so that you, the viewer, can better understand and forecast what will be involved in your decision to move forward with the development here in Whatcom County that involves critical area mitigation. Now, your project may be a tenth the size of this project, or maybe 10 times the size of this project. The pattern that you'll see laid out in the main part of this project, of this video, will still apply to your project. So keep that in mind as you continue to watch the video. At the end of the video, we're going to go in depth into all of the reports that we have produced for this project, and in that you'll see some of the other services that aren't laid out in the main part of the video. So keep that in mind as you're watching the video, and now we can back to looking into the Whispering Meadows development in Nooksack, Washington. Meadows. So let's come over here, and I'll short myself here so we can get a bigger picture, and we'll just jump right to the development. So Whispering Meadows is located in Nooksack, which is, you can see, not that too far away from Bellingham. And we'll just go right into it. Now here's the property, approximately 40 acres, total of 90 units developed on the property, not units, lots, 90 lots developed on the property, 29 lots down here in phase 1, 61 lots developed on phase 2 of the property. Both phases had significant mitigation plans associated with them, and therefore mitigation sites, and continued monitoring and maintenance of those mitigation sites. So in this video, like I said in the beginning, we are going to show you ATSI services and how we participated in the development, from initial assessment of the raw land and the delineation of environmental critical areas to the impacts or damages done to the critical areas. And let's just talk about that for a second. An impact is essentially just a technical term for damage done to critical areas. Now that's really simplistic, but in terms of this video, and for people that may not know anything about environmental consulting or development in general, I think that's a helpful label for impacts. Essentially, the idea is that in order to allow for human development, a certain amount of damage is allowed and permissible for the development to go through. So, say that again. Essentially, the idea is that there is, and this idea is set forth by the code and regulations from local, state, and federal that there is a certain amount of damage that is allowed to occur to environmental critical areas in order to ensure human development. So that is what an impact is, essentially. So from the damage to the critical areas, you need to protect more important or mitigate for that damage somehow. And that's where mitigation plan comes into play. And then the mitigation plan lays out plants that you can put between the development and these important critical areas. Maybe you can create new critical areas somewhere else on the property. That's a whole other video that we'll do sometime about the depths of mitigation. In terms of this particular project, the mitigation plan led to the installation of the mitigation plan and then the monitoring and the maintenance of that mitigation plan. So let's recap. So in this video, like we said in the beginning, we're going to talk about the original assessment of this raw land, including the environmental critical areas and their buffers. We're going to talk about the impacts or damages to those critical areas and buffers. And then we're going to show you the mitigation plan that we designed for those impacts, and then how we installed that mitigation site and how we continue to monitor and maintain that mitigation site. Now, before we do any of that, we're going to go ahead and start at the end where it's at today, or at least relative to today. We're going to go through a drone video that was taken in the summer of 2023, and it's going to show you what a development site looks like about 2-3 years after being installed, or sorry, mitigation site looks like about 2 or 3 years after being installed. So the drone starts here on Brentwood Drive. It's going to raise up here. It's going to look over this part of the mitigation site. It's going to look over the slough, kind of continue to pan across. It's going to look over this mitigation site. It's going to continue to turn and go look down this mitigation site. And then it's going to kind of come down here. And when we get about this area, I'm going to pause the video. And I'm going to pause the video a few times to discuss interesting things about the mitigation site that the drone video actually does a really good job of providing a perspective that we can describe. And I'm going to take some snippets in this video to kind of sketch up real quick some conceptual ideas to help explain what a wetland is, what it looks like in real life, what the buffer looks like, the mitigation. So it really helps be really concrete with wetlands, buffers, and impacts and mitigation for those impacts. So anyways, the drone video is going to keep going. It's going to go down to the end, and then when we're done, we're going to go back to Google Earth Pro, and we're going to go from to the original raw land aerial. We're going to show you the delineation, where the wetlands are and where the wetlands are not. We're going to show you the buffers to those wetlands, and then we'll talk about the planning of the two different developments and the mitigation for that. So let's go ahead and jump into that video here, that drone video. So here we are at the mitigation site, and as we push forward, one of the first things you'll see is the split rail fence here. So on this site, there is something like 1,600 feet of split rail fence between all the different mitigation sites. You put a split rail fence around a mitigation site to indicate that it is a mitigation site, because on these fences you may see signs that gets put up, like you see right here. There's a little sign right here that says natural growth protection area. It indicates that it's a protected area for mitigation site, and that it also is intended to stop people walking through there, and theoretically potentially stop a rolling car, or a car. Obviously, if a big car goes through that, it's going to roll right through the split rail fence. What that shows is there's different ways to delineate a mitigation site. I mean, delineate might not be the right word, because you delineate wetlands, but to indicate that a mitigation site is in an area, you can use different means of doing that. In this case, and in most cases, we use split rail fence. You can also use large boulders put apart maybe like 10 feet, you know, 2-3-man boulders about every 10 feet that can serve the same purposes. Obviously, that's a lot more expensive, so most people opt out of that. Another thing I want to highlight here as the camera stopped is the difference between this long mitigation site and these short ones. So if you look closely, you can, as we go along, you'll see it. Maybe I'll back up here. You know, you can see it back to this other mitigation area. So you can see a plan here, plan here, plan here. You know, you look closely, you can see plants kind of all over the place here. And when we pan back over, you can see them spotted throughout here. And then when we get to the other site, you immediately see all this brown. So what that is the difference in technique of mulching. On this area, we used what we call sheet mulching. In this area, we used ring mulching. Essentially, it's sheet mulching. You bring a large amount of mulch to the site. You spread it all out first before you do any planting or anything else. And when you plant, you dig through that mulch and plant it to the ground under the mulch there. Now, the benefits to sheet mulch is that if it's done right, if it's thick enough, it does a really, really good job of suffocating invasive plants like blackberries, reed canary grass. Obviously, it's much more expensive in material costs, but a big enough site such as this one, with enough plants, it saves money on labor costs than having individuals go plant by plant with a wheelbarrow moving the mulch down. It's just the logistics of moving the mulch down to the area that it's needed is also, especially after the plants get installed, can be really difficult to deal with and really expensive. So in this site, we did sheet mulching here, and I'll show you videos of that process later on, and we did ring mulching here. So as we continue on, you can see the split rail fence on the side, continuation of that, and the slough here on the left. And see some plants coming through. We'll talk about this a little later, but this is actually the stormwater outlet for the development. You can see the pipe kind of come through here. And there's different plants that were planned for this area than this area here for the buffer enhancement. We'll go through all that later. So this area up here is something was the part I wanted to pause and show you really clearly, a quick sketch up of the wetland, or the slough, the buffer, the development, the impact to that buffer, and then the mitigation site in between. So pull up snipping tool, take a quick snippet of that, bring that onto the screen here. Match it up because that's sweet. Okay, so essentially the idea is this is the wetland here. We'll use blue. Here's the buffer. Buffer probably goes out about here. This particular design is not an exact science. This is just for a conceptual idea. We'll use green for the development. Obviously, the development kind of comes through here, cuts around. So there's this area, and let's use purple. And we'll show you on the aerials the entire development of this, essentially the same mock-up. So this area right here, and that kind of comes all the way around. Bring this blue, so you can imagine the buffer comes around all the way around, cuts out here. It's hard to do on this image, but this. This area here, this is the impact area. So what we can see is the wetland has a buffer here. The development is allowed to damage that buffer, which is the green line. That's as much as it's allowed to damage the buffer, which is this blue line. The development is allowed to damage that buffer up to this green line, and this area of damage is the impacts. This purple area is the impact. So that square footage of impact is then converted into a ratio of size of mitigation. So let me say that again. The square footage of impact is converted through a ratio to create the ratio of mitigation needed to continue to protect, and that determines the size of the mitigation site, which then has different performance standards required for that mitigation site so that it can continue to become established and then long-term to exist. So this is just a really great perspective of real world. Here's the wetland, here's the buffer, here's the development into the buffer to this green line, and here's the impacts. And now this area, that didn't work, yellow didn't work very well. This area is the mitigation site between the two. And so this area is determined by essentially a math problem of the impacts that happened in purple. And again, after this drone video, we're gonna zoom back out to the Google Earth Pro map, and we're gonna show you the wetland delineation from the big picture. We'll show you the buffers, we'll show you the impacts to that, and you can kind of see it from a bigger perspective. But this is a really great way to see the wetland, the buffer, the development, the impact, and the mitigation site all kind of come back in real world terms. So let's close that snippet and continue on. Yeah, you see the development is still in the video, is still continuing to be constructed. It still is being constructed. It's a great place to live. My wife and I actually thought about moving there. By the way, this is not I was not prompted by the developer or HOA to do this property, even though it is a sweet property to live on. I'm totally doing this for the mitigation site. So as we go through here, we can see that the mulch is a little thicker here, so it's doing a little better job of keeping out the invasives, but you can see the plants coming out, living nice and strong through there. So yeah, so that's the end of the drone video that we're going to show you today, or at least this drone video. We'll go do other drone videos of the mulch installation. It's really interesting. Do that later. But now we're going to jump out of the drone video and go back to Google Earth Pro. Okay, now we're here back in Google Earth Pro. We're taking a look at the historical aerials image, and we're going to start from the very beginning of the assessment of we're going to look at the raw land. We're going to look at the assessment of that raw land. We're going to look at the wetland delineation, and then the buffers of the wetland, and then we will look at the design of the development phases, phase 1 and phase 2, incorporating the impacts or damages to the critical area buffers, and then we'll look at the mitigation plan for those impacts and the end result design for those mitigation sites that are a result of the mitigation plan that we designed. And that result was the drone video that we had just came from. Okay, so we're gonna go back to 2016. There's a great image of the property. And we'll take off the property polygon so that we can clearly see the raw land. And what you see here is 40 acres of farm field with a wetland slough in it. And we can look back, and in Google Earth Pro goes back to all the way in this area, goes back to 1985. You know, not very good, but then the images become more clear. And over time it gets more, you can see, at least since 1985, that property has been a farm field. Back 2016 to this great image. So first things first, developer says, hey, I want to develop this property. I need a wetland delineation. They hire ATSI, has it come up, has us come out, and we delineate the wetland. Now, this isn't the exact wetland. This is an overlay from our exact delineation. And later on in the video, we are going to go in depth into the actual documentation that we produce, that we did produce, that we do produce, we continue to produce to the regulators with the jurisdiction, so that they can so that they know that these environmental critical areas are being protected. So first things first. So one of the first documents we produced was a critical areas report that showed this wetland delineation. Also in that critical areas report, you have what's called the rating forms. The rating forms are the documentation set by the state, by Washington State, that determines how large the buffer width, so the buffer area is between this wetland and development. So we'll go into depth in a later video as to what a wetland is and what a wetland is not. That's outside of the scope of this video. For this video, we're going to just go through this conceptually so that someone can understand what a development is like in terms of normal mitigation requirements and what they can expect in the process. By the way, although this is a 40-acre site, this pattern of buffer impacts with buffer enhancement mitigation is really, really common all across Whatcom County and Washington State. It's very, very common. This is just a large scale version of it. So, first step first, do the wetland delineation. We did the wetland delineation. We put the information through the rating forms, which are a document from the state of Washington. And that document is essentially a long math problem that ends up with a number for the category wetland and the buffer area required to protect that wetland. So in this case, the buffer area required to protect this wetland was 189 feet. And that's what that looks like overlaid. So this is the wetland here. And this is the buffer area from human development to protect the wetland. Now that's in place for runoff, noise, to give some area between the wetlands and development, human impacts. Now, the developer will take this map and give it to an engineer, or maybe sketch it up in his head, work with us to make his final development plan. And so in this instance, phase 1 development plan, so that's phase 2. Phase 1 development plan looked like that. That is 29 lots, and as we see here, it encroaches on this buffer significantly. And that's allowed, right? That's allowed damage to critical area buffers so that the human development can occur. This is what's supposed to happen. So that purple area is the square footage of impacts to the wetland buffer. So, and we can continue on with the images here, and I'll show you the actual aerial of breaking ground for phase 1 and the beginning of development for phase 1. And to make it more clear, we'll remove the impact area, and we'll move and we'll zoom in this area here, and we will move forward with the images. And there we go. So you can see, based on his plan, on our mitigation plan, that is where he dictated to have, I want to show you, that is where he dictated to have his development. Another thing you may notice, right away in the image, you can see rows and rows of plants all the way through here. All the way through. So the mitigation site actually includes into here. So this is in 2018 when the development happened. You can see the development area, but you can actually see the actual image of the breaking ground. The beginning of the mitigation site for phase 1. Move forward a year. You can see that mitigation site is much more developed in the aerials. And obviously the development is established as well. And so so this becomes the mitigation area. Jump back here. This green area, this green outline, is the mitigation area to account for the impacts, these impacts that are to the mitigation, to the wetland buffer from the development of the property. We can just see that the negotiation happened, and the success, you can see the success of the mitigation site over the years. It continues to get thicker and thicker all throughout here. So that's a protective vegetation area between the human developments, the human damage to the buffer, and the critical areas, that's the wetland. So let's zoom. So that's phase 1. So let's take a step back again. So move the impacts, the mitigation area, and we will put in the buffer. That's the wetland buffer. From that buffer, and we'll go back one more so you don't see the breaking ground. So here's the developable area planned after our wetland delineation. We indicated the impacts. This is the mitigation area for those impacts. And this is the fruition of that mitigation area, is the thickness of this vegetated area between the development and the wetland. Now that's phase 1. So now looking into phase 2, and I'll add this other buffer up here. It's a replication essentially of the same process, and we'll jump into that now. In order to totally focus on phase 2, we are going to remove the distractions from phase 1, just for this presentation purpose, just for the purposes of this presentation only. Keep in mind, as I remove these shapefiles, this isn't what we did on the project. And the project and the report, and again, we will dive into the reports later on in the video. We show everything on the maps all at once for the permitting. So we'll go ahead and remove the shapefiles here. All phase 1 off. We'll move the buffer for phase 1 as well, just so we can focus simply on the areas that are affected by phase 2. Okay, phase 2. Here is the development area for phase 2. This is the area for the 61 lots that are going to be developed at this time in the development, as well as this beautiful access bridge that they built. If you ever drive out that area out in Nooksack on Gillies Road, this is Gillies Road right here. It's a really beautiful bridge. And one of the cool things about the bridge, one of the really cool things about the bridge is that it actually spans the entirety of the wetland. Now, so the impacts are not wetland impacts. There's only wetland buffer impacts. So when we pull up the phase 2 impacts, we can see that it had buffer impacts all the way along here, buffer impacts for this area up to the wetland, and then over the wetland, and then on the other side there was buffer impacts for the wetland buffers. So that's a great thing because buffer impacts are much, much, much easier to permit and to manage than wetland impacts. Buffer impacts are much more affordable in terms of time and money than wetland impacts. For example, and we're going to dive more into mitigation in a different video like I referred to. One example of how it's more affordable for buffer impacts is the monitoring period that is required after you install buffer enhancement for the buffer impacts. So the regulations say for buffer enhancement planting, you have to review that. You have to monitor that mitigation site for 5 years for buffer enhancement, which is a result from buffer impacts. For wetland creation mitigation, you have to review that mitigation site for 10 years. So for wetland impacts, that generally creates, not always, again, there's nuances to it, but generally speaking, it creates wetland mitigation or wetland creation mitigation, which will require 10 years of monitoring, where buffer impacts create buffer enhancement, generally speaking, and that results in 5 years of monitoring. So that's a difference of 5 years, 60 months of maintenance, monitoring, another delineation. For a delineation is only good for 5 years. So if you have a 10-year wetland creation monitoring site, at year 5 of that 10 years, you need to go back and delineate that wetland all over again in order to fulfill the monitoring requirements for the wetland impact mitigation. So I'll say that again. A wetland delineation is only good for 5 years. If you have a 10-year monitoring period for wetland impacts, for wetland mitigation, for wetland creation mitigation, there's a lot of gations, or there's a lot of different words that end with the same ending. Mitigation, installation, impacts, monitoring. Anyways, so the wetland fill impacts create wetland creation monitoring, which requires 10 years of monitoring. And because a wetland delineation is only good for 5 years, at some point during that 10-year wetland creation monitoring period, the owner of the property, whether the HOA or the developer, will have to go back and redelineate the wetland completely. So it's a lot of money if you're going to do wetland fill and wetland impacts. Buffer impacts, totally different story. Only 5 years of monitoring, just planting and usually weed whacking on for the buffer enhancement maintenance. So that's one cool thing about phase 2. Another cool thing about phase 2 is, if you recall earlier in the video, I highlighted the old access road. We'll kind of zoom in there just so we can kind of get focused on that. The old access road up here. So cool thing about this old access road is that it did not have any issues regulatorily. The jurisdiction did not ask for it to be removed. It was not required for the mitigation, for the development. The developer only did it for increased environmental function. That's pretty sweet. So, and when you restore something, it's exactly what it sounds like. You restore it to the original conditions as best as possible. So, I don't know if you remember that video, but when the drone video was here and it looked over this way, you may recall that this was just an open slough in the video. You can go back in the video and take a look there if you want to check that out. So, but this access road was restored back to original conditions and was taken out, and in part of being taken out, restoring these areas, which was gravel, back to buffer, became revegetated, and we planted all in that area. So that's a really cool thing that the developer did. So we wrapped up the planting area for that restoration into the mitigation plan for the entire, for all of phase 2. So we'll zoom back out, and we'll take a big picture look here at phase 2, and what we're going to do. So let me take another step back. So that was the rest. Those are the two cool, interesting things about phase 2: the restoration of the old access road that didn't need to happen and really looks beautiful now, and you can see that in the drone footage, and then the beautiful bridge that spans all of the wetlands, and so did not have any wetland filled. So that was a creative way that developer, obviously it was expensive on the front end with the design of the bridge and the construction of the bridge, but he saved time and money on the back end because he didn't have to have any wetland fill. So the two cool things about this for phase 2 development is the restoration of the old access road and the installation of that really beautiful, cool bridge. Again, I think you can see the bridge in the video, in the drone video, but if you're driving down Gilly Roads, go take a look at it. So to just kind of get focused up here more, I'm going to remove, now the next step in the process is designing the mitigation site for both the restoration area and the impacts of the development. So we're going to, because it's all kind of layered on top of each other and kind of difficult to see in this, we're going to remove the developable area. We're going to remove the wetland buffers. We'll remove the wetland. And we see there we have the impacted area and the restoring area that needed to happen. And we will go ahead and put on the mitigation area that was planned for and incorporated both all the impacts for phase 2 and the restoration of that old access road. Now, there is about 6 acres of mitigation site here. 6 acres of between the 4 different green zones in those areas. We had about 3 acres, 2.7 acres of impacts to the buffer. So you do your math. What does it tell you? There is a 1 or 2 to 1 ratio for the creation of these mitigation sites. So that means for 1 square foot of impact to the buffer, 2 square feet of buffer impacts needed to be created. And so we were able to be creative in this situation because with the location of the mitigation sites. So the mitigation site here was between the development and the wetland, but we were able to expand that to the other side over here because that increased the square footage available to us in designing the mitigation plan. So let's go ahead and take a look. Let's take a step back and reflect. So we had the wetland buffers. This was the design. This is what needed to be restored. This was the impacts for everything, and this is the area that was determined to be the mitigation for those impacts, aka damages to the critical areas and the buffers. So that is phase 2, and we can go ahead and we're going to move forward in time here with the historical aerials, only a few years, to watch that development happen. Right, first goes in the road, right, and I'll remove some of these so that we can maybe take a closer look at what it looks like in the aerials. Next year, houses are being built, and that's here we're up to 2023, the most recent aerial image on Google Earth Pro. So let's remove the impacts and the mitigation area and the development area polygons and the wetlands polygons. And we can take a look at this beautiful bridge. Here in this image, right, you can see, I think this aerial image was done very similar to the time of the drone. So that's pretty cool. I didn't plan that. That's pretty fortuitous. But you can see that access road is restored. There it is there. And this is them building the bridge. The next year, access road is restored. The mitigation site is incorporating that. You can see how it used to come around here on the corner. And now that's all restored. You can see the little dirt. And these are all mitigation sites. And this is that sheet mulching that we discussed. And now, so that is phase 1 and phase 2 of Whispering Meadows development. And so now I'm going to share with you some beautiful footage of the actual creation of the mitigation site. Okay, now we're going to show you a drone video compilation of the installation of the sheet mulching for the phase 2 mitigation site install. And what I think is so fascinating about this project in particular, is just the sheer amount of volume of mulch that we used. So I'll start the video here, and what you'll see through the compilation is you'll see the piles of the mulch all laid out over the mitigation site, and then we'll cut to another video of it spread out, and then we'll cut to the final video when it's finished right before it's prepped for planting. And then after we go through that video, this video compilation will dive into all the reports and the texts that we've done for both phase 1 and phase 2 of the project. So one thing that jumps out to me right away is the scale of those piles. So each one of those piles, so here's an excavator. It's a full-size excavator, not a mini. And here's a pile of mulch. Each one of these mulch piles is 80 yards. So it's just an enormous endeavor to bring all that mulch in. And it's just fascinating to see it all come together. And so the next video is going to be where it's put out. You can see the tools that we used to spread it out. And again, like I said, I don't recall if that was a different video, but we've spent about $40,000 of this hog fuel mulch. So that's something to point out. This is hog fuel mulch. It's called hog fuel. So you can see there just how thick each one of these little deals here. You can see my smiling mug. We just got this drone, and it's fun to do shoots in it. So we've been planning this video for some time. But you can see these huge mulch pieces. They're essentially just like little pieces of wood. It's not even mulch, but you use a lot of it. It's really affordable, and you use a lot of it, and that's what can suffocate the invasive species. Is what you want to do. Invasive plant species like reed canary grass or blackberries, Japanese knotweed. So this is the final shot of the installation of the sheet mulch. Goes from side to side. We leave areas open for the stormwater drains, for the stormwater outlets into the slough. And yeah, you can see nice and flat all the way through. And that's what it looked like right before we got into planting. So we looked at how the install of the enormous amount of mulch. We saw the piles, we saw them spread out, and now we're going to dive into all of the reports for both phase 1 and phase 2 of the development of the Whispering Meadow development. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the documentation. Now, before we do that, let's take a step back and talk about what we're going to review in this section of the video. We are not going to review any of the documentation from phase 1, and that's for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is that there's enough documentation here in phase 2 that you'll get a really good sense of what the reporting consists of. The second reason is that phase 1 is actually closed out already. So, and that's really cool, because it was planned to have phase 1 reviewed by the regulatory jurisdictions for 5 years, and because of our close maintenance and monitoring of that phase 1 mitigation site, the regulators released the developer from the responsibility and the oversight for that last year. So they only had 4 years of monitoring when normally they would have had 5 years of monitoring. So that's pretty cool. So we're just going to review the phase 2 documentation here today. And I've split that up into 3 different sections. We have the documentation of stuff that happened before the So let's take a step back. So for people that may not know anything about development, the phases are and we'll do a whole other video and about this as well. Essentially, it's you look at a piece of property, figure out if you can do what you want to do with it or what you can do with it. Essentially, that's something called feasibility. So that's kind of what this first section is. It's not feasibility, but it's part of the process. I'm going to call it phase 2 pre-application, even though it's not part of the official pre-application meeting, which is a whole other specific technical jargon for something else that is not relevant for this particular video. The next piece of development is, generally speaking, is when you say, okay, hey, look, this project is feasible. We can do the things that we want to do, or we can do something with it. So I'm going to actually submit my plan through the official documentation, through the jurisdictional regulations, so that they can understand, so they can review all the documents and they can sign off on it. So that's application. This is all high level, simplistic, but just kind of review this here. And then the last piece is after the application has been approved, the development occurs, and in our case with all the environmental mitigation that is required for that development, and then the monitoring of and the subsequent documentation after the development has been developed. And so in our case, that's environmental monitoring. So I've split up the documentation into those 3 sections: pre-application, the stuff we used for the application, and the stuff we've done after the completion of the install and the maintenance of the mitigation. So first thing here is the conceptual mitigation plan. So developers like, hey, you delineated this wetland, and they'll show on the page at the end. Give me a conceptual mitigation plan and tell me if my idea is feasible and what that will, let's really refine, let's really negotiate what that looks like for the end result. So existing conditions, pretty simple stuff. Base information on the property, existing conditions, impacts, right? So this is documenting a lot of the information that we reviewed on the video. Mitigation, talk about needing floodplain mitigation. That's something I didn't talk about in the bigger part of the video that we were associated with. And we have a summary. We have the signatures of the different people that worked on the project, or on this conceptual mitigation site. And so at the end here, we have a figure that kind of lays out more in depth the conceptual nature of this mitigation site. So, or the concept that lays out the mitigation plan more in depth than what we showed in the video. So one of the things that jumps out is the many different types of polygons on this figure. Now, when we did this development, or when we did this conceptual mitigation plan, there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of different areas and families of plants that are used to end up with a specific result. So, and a lot of those plants are in different lists, right? So one plant that is good for buffer enhancement may also be good for buffer restoration, replacement, but not good for wetland impacts. Other way around. Some plants are good for both wetland impacts mitigation and buffer enhancement mitigation. Some plants are only good for wetland creation. So these different families of plants that we draw from to functionally create a desired result. And that's kind of laid out here on this map. So, we have the wet buffer, wetlands and impacts, and we have obviously the phase 1, but this phase 2 and 3, the development was originally broken up into 3 phases, but it just turned into being 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. But we can, so the map is just focused on phase 2 and phase 3, and for our purpose, just phase 2, which is what we're calling phase 2 and phase 3. We're calling that phase 2, just their conceptual mitigation plan. So each one of these polygons means something different. It means a different family of plants that we are taking from to put into those areas. And there's the whole list right here. And so I made a mistake earlier when I said it was only 6 acres. The conceptual mitigation plan laid out for only 6.4 acres. But as we'll see later in the actual mitigation plan, it turns out to be 7.5 acres of total mitigation. So, so that's the conceptual mitigation plan. And it's a lot of work going into the back end of the document. So now another thing that we did for pre-application is we answered that we needed a shoreline variance for this development because it was too close to the shoreline. So that was something else that we didn't discuss in the larger part of the video. And I'll do another video later on that kind of details all of these answers and jumps into this document in particular, most likely. But you can kind of see just the ideas of the questions, ideas of the comments or issues that need to be resolved before they will allow for a shoreline variance. For example, 2.6e, I'm just picking this as I'm going through the video now. Shoreline uses should protect scenic vistas and aesthetics of the shoreline environment. That's something that needs to happen in order for a shoreline variance to come through. And then our response is the scenic vistas of Nooksack Slough is found in pocket experiences as one explores the hidden world within the forests. A few slightly isolated viewing points will be designated to allow for having the experience, but without destroying the overall effect of the small wilderness area within the community. Beautiful poetic wording. Awesome. Well done. And so a lot, the questions are questions and response through that whole thing. And the conclusion is the most important part to the developer. Phase 2 and Phase 3 project has met or exceeds the overall objectives and thus entirely consistent with the program. Sweet. Shoreline variance accepted. And we proposed that, and obviously it was because the development ended up being closer to the shoreline than is normally required. Okay, let's look at Phase 2 application. This is, I got to be careful. I can't show the top of these documents because it has personal contact information for the developer, Greg Crim. And he, by the way, I'll put this in the notes for the video. He did give us permission to view this project with you guys. So this is the addendum. So we created a critical area mitigation plan, and we had an addendum to that mitigation plan. And this is all the reasons why we had an addendum to that mitigation plan. And this is the actual addendum to that mitigation plan, which resulted in a total of 7.5 acres. And we can show that, and that is shown here in the actual. So this is the original MIT plan. Again, I can't show the cover pages because it has personal contact info on it of the developer. But this is the actual mitigation plan that originally was submitted. We can see there's a total. So just in this one area alone, right here, that big long area, there's 4,100 plants proposed. And over the entirety of the document of the mitigation plan, there's like about 7. If you add all these totals up, this is not a total for this whole thing. This is total just for this one table. So each one of these tables is a different subsection family of plants, like we talked about earlier, that we are drawing from to submit a total review area of that. So when we go ahead and look at all this, it comes out to about 7,000 plants. So that being said, and there's a little section for notes here, we can review this document and all the text of this document, and we can see that, and this is the figure from the amendment of that document, and we really simplified those different family of plants that we took from. So in the conceptual one, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different family of plants that we draw from different polygons, and in the actual mitigation plan, there's only 3. There is riparian buffer enhancement, upland buffer enhancement, wetland and buffer enhancement planting. Just a little small one here and there. And that is for phase 1. That is unrelated to phase 1. So if we go back to the actual mitigation plan, we can see those different family of plants and what was included in each one. So, and this also includes the stormwater outfall, right? So we talked about that one area that's different than all the rest of the area that we left. The one in the drone videos, when you look and you see, and there's one area that's not mulched, this is what we put sluice sledge and twinberry and red osier dogwood and Douglas spirea in those areas, but we didn't really put any sluice sledge anywhere else in any other of the other areas. So that totals out the total planting and talks about mulch. Talked about the spread mulch, sheet mulching. Talked about the potential need of irrigation. We talked about protection, the signs and fences. We went over that in the video. Performance standards. This is really important. So this lays out that says, hey, these things need to occur in order for that mitigation site to be successful. And if it's successful, then you get your money back from the bond that we went over earlier also. So what we did then, if you continue to look through the document, and we can review it here, and you're welcome to just stop the video and review any of this information. So that's essentially encapsulating the information that we submitted along with the rest of the permit. So we'll close these two just so we can stay focused, and now I'll go to the monitoring. Monitoring, this is the first step of the monitoring, is the as-built report. The as-built report says, hey, this mitigation site was or was not installed per the mitigation plan, as the mitigation plan, in this case mitigation plan, and the amendment to the mitigation plan dictates. So in this we say it's very similar, talks about what we did, talks about the plants that we have recorded as being installed, 7,840. Talk about photo points. And again, we'll do a whole other video specifically on monitoring and what's included in that. We'll really dive really in depth into all of this in a different video. And so we can look through all this, and we have figures at the end here that look through the monitoring, what we did, photo point transects, some pictures, photo points. Photo points is where you take the same photo from the same location every year after year after year, and you can see the growth. So you can see the first picture, second picture, a little bit of growth, first, second. Oh, these are all different areas, different photo points. So then every year, if you take all the monitoring reports and you put them together and you look at the different photo points and you compare them, you can see the growth over year. So this is just the as-built. So it's not. It doesn't have multiple years involved in it. So let's look at the next phase one year for full monitoring. Same exact stuff, details, a lot of what we went to the site, the plants that we know that were installed, what performance standards were met, what needs help, recommendations. We always include recommendations in our monitoring reports. And then it talks about the site map and the different photo points. And again, we'll jump into all this in another video. And then year 2 monitoring. This happened in 2024. We just submitted this. Technically, this is the 3rd year that we've gone out and reviewed, which is actually technically the 2nd year of monitoring. And talk about the total number of plants got put in, how the site continues to meet and needs help for a continuation of the targets met and targets not met, and we do recommendations for recommendations for the site. So same thing, got here in the photo points here at the end. And so yeah, the project, there were some targets that were not met for the site this year, but it is meeting performance standards overall, and that's awesome and great for the developer and great for the HOA and the health of the mitigation side and of the wetlands and the important critical areas of that. So that's the documentation, and we're going to go ahead and stop here, and we're going to jump back to the aerial image, Google Images, and we'll do a quick summary of everything that we talked about today. In summary, this project, which has been going on since 2018, where we first delineated the wetland, we determined its buffers, we planned the development areas for phase 1 and the phase 2, and we looked at the impacts for phase 1, and then we looked at the impacts for phase 2, and they included restoration area, and then we planned the mitigation area for phase 1 and the mitigation area for phase 2, and that all results in what is demonstrated there today. So thank you so much for watching, and then we reviewed all of the regulatory documents. Well, before we looked over the documents, we reviewed in the mitigation, the spreading of the mulch, interesting piece of that mitigation, and then we reviewed all the documents for phase 2. So thank you so much for watching. If you have a project where you're looking to develop a raw piece of land in Washington State or Oregon or in Alaska, please come let us know, and we can help you through the environmental consulting, the environmental regulations, and the install of the mitigation and the monitoring and maintenance of that mitigation, regardless if it's this size project, or a smaller project, or a bigger project. We can help you with all of that. Give me a call. Let us know. We do have rush orders for projects as well, so if you have something you need to get through quickly. And yeah, this is just really, really great project, really great developer, and something we're really, really proud of here. And we'll do a zoom out so you can get a better idea of where this project is in terms of the area. We'll go back to where we started. The whole Earth. ATSI worldwide. Have a great day.